Throughout history, certain warriors and military leaders have left a dark legacy due to their extreme brutality and ruthless governance. These figures often ruled with an iron fist, causing immense suffering and devastation. Let's take a look at history's most notorious leaders. 1. Genghis Khan, Mongol Empire. Genghis Khan, a Mongolian, founded the Mongol Empire, which became the largest contiguous empire in history. For 30 years, Genghis Khan and his Mongolian hordes swept through Asia, slaughtering over 1/10 of the people on Earth and conquering nearly 1/4 of the land. His was the most violent reign in all of human history. His military campaigns were marked by extreme violence, including the mass slaughter of entire populations. He used terror as a weapon, often massacring cities that resisted, leaving pyramids of skulls to instill fear in others. Genghis Khan died during the battle conquering the kingdom of Xixia. On his wishes, he was buried in an unknown place. The slaves were massacred by the soldiers who escorted them and tossed them into the grave. Upon returning to the camp, the soldiers were promptly slaughtered as well. The burial place of Genghis Khan remains a mystery to this day. Vlad the Impaler, Wallachia. Vlad III, also known as Vlad the Impaler, was a 15th century ruler of Wallachia, modern-day Romania, and is considered one of the most brutal rulers in history. He earned his nickname by impaling tens of thousands of enemies, criminals, and traitors on stakes. Vlad the Impaler was inarguably a brutal ruler, but the view on him from inside his territories wasn't one of fear. The Wallachians saw Vlad as a powerful ruler that protected them and their Christian ways well against the Ottoman Empire. His cruelty was legendary and inspired the Dracula myth. Attila, the leader of the Huns in the 5th century, was known as the Scourge of God due to the terror he spread across Europe. Attila was known to the Romans for his brutality and a penchant for sacking and pillaging Roman cities. He's considered one of the greatest barbarian rulers in history, having successfully expanded the rule of the Huns and maintained a near-perfect record in battle. His campaigns were marked by indiscriminate slaughter, looting, and destruction, causing entire cities to flee at the mere mention of his name. In AD 453, Attila died in bed, supposedly due to a nosebleed caused by a brain hemorrhage after a night of heavy feasting and drinking. Tamerlane, Timur. Timur Ileng, who became known as Timur or Tamerlane in Europe, was a 14th century conqueror of Mongol ancestry who founded the Timurid Empire, an empire that stretched across Central Asia and Persia. His campaigns were exceptionally brutal. He is notorious for building towers made of the skulls of his enemies, slaughtering millions, beheading, hanging, trampling to death by horses his victims, and completely destroying cities that opposed him. Tamerlane clashed with the powerful Ottoman Empire in several battles, leaving a mark on the historic rivalry between the two empires. His achievements shaped the history of Central Asia and beyond. Ivar the Boneless, Viking leader. A feared Viking leader, Ivar Ragnarsson, or Ivan the Boneless's body was so frail that he had to be carried on a shield when he went into battle, but his mind was one of the sharpest around. This was the man who led the great Viking heathen army on its savage raids across England in the late 9th century. Under Ivar, the Vikings terrorized the nation and conquered everything from Essex to Dublin. Ivar ushered in an era of Viking domination over Britain that wouldn't end until long after his death. His methods of torture and execution were exceptionally cruel, earning him a reputation for extreme brutality. He was particularly infamous for the blood eagle, a gruesome execution method which consists of opening the rib cage from behind and pulling the lungs out into the shape of wings. Then, to make it as painful as possible, salt was sprinkled into the bloody wounds. 6. Hernán Cortés, Spanish conquistador. Hernán Cortés led the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire in the early 16th century. His conquest was marked by extreme violence, deceit, mass enslavement, and exploitation, and the massacre of thousands of indigenous people. The destruction of Tenochtitlan, the brutal suppression of the Aztecs, superior weapons and diseases brought by the Europeans, decimated the Aztec population and left a lasting scar on history. The collapsed Aztec Empire established Spanish colonial rule in modern-day Mexico. Shaka Zulu, Zulu Kingdom. Shaka Zulu, known as the African Napoleon, was the leader of the powerful Zulu Kingdom, a tribe Shaka transformed militarily and economically with other tribes he conquered as well in the early 19th century, and is credited with revolutionizing Zulu warfare. He was a master military tactician. His military tactics were highly effective but also extremely brutal. He implemented a policy of total war, massacres, annihilating rival clans, and incorporating survivors into his army. His reign of terror led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands. There was hardly any chiefdom that could go toe-to-toe with his Zulu kingdom. According to some accounts, Shaka's latter years on the throne saw him act in a mad manner as he was reeling from the death of his mother in 1827. He was killed by his half-brothers in 1828. Tomás de Torquemada, Spanish Inquisition. As the first Grand Inquisitor of the Spanish Inquisition, established to keep Catholicism alive in Spain, in 1478 to 1834, Torquemada oversaw the persecution, confiscation, torture, expulsion, and execution of thousands of people accused of heresy and false conversions. His methods, including the water cure, similar to waterboarding and being burned alive, were notorious for their cruelty, and his terrifying reign became synonymous with religious fanaticism and terror. After 15 years as Grand Inquisitor for Spain, Tomás de Torquemada died in the monastery in Avila. Emperor Nero, Roman Empire. Nero, the Roman emperor from 54 to 68 AD, is infamous for his cruel and tyrannical rule. Known for killing his mother, stepbrother, and his wives, and the brutal persecution of Christians, including burning them alive, having them crucified, and letting wild beasts attack them, Nero's reign was marked by political purges, executions, and the brutal suppression of dissent. By the time he was 30, opposition to Nero had gathered momentum. With support from the army, the Senate declared him a public enemy, meaning he could be stripped and beaten to death if he were found. Nero fled at night to a suburban villa and killed himself as the guards were approaching. Pol Pot, Khmer Rouge. As the leader of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia from 1975 to 1979, Pol Pot orchestrated one of the most brutal genocides in history. His regime sought to create an agrarian socialist utopia founded on the policies of ultra-Maoism and influenced by the Cultural Revolution. Pol Pot and other Khmer Rouge officials met with Mao in Beijing in June 1975, receiving approval and advice, while high-ranking CCP officials later visited Cambodia to offer help. To fulfill its goals, the Khmer Rouge emptied the cities and forced Cambodians to relocate to labor camps in the countryside, where mass executions, forced labor, physical abuse, malnutrition, and disease were rampant. In 1976, the Khmer Rouge renamed the country Democratic Kampuchea. The massacres ended when the Vietnamese military invaded in 1978 and toppled the Khmer Rouge regime. By January 1979, 1.5 to 2 million people had died due to the Khmer Rouge's policies. 20,000 people passed through the security prison 21, one of the 196 prisons the Khmer Rouge operated, and only 7 adults survived. The prisoners were taken to the killing fields, where they were executed, often with pickaxes to save bullets, and buried in mass graves. Abduction and indoctrination of children was widespread, and many were persuaded or forced to commit atrocities. Direct execution is believed to account for up to 60% of the genocide's death toll, with other victims succumbing to starvation, exhaustion, forced labor, or disease. The massacres ended when the Vietnamese military invaded in 1978 and toppled the Khmer Rouge regime. 11. Queen Ranavalona I, Madagascar. Ranavalona I, known as the Mad Queen of Madagascar, ruled from 1828 to 1861. Her reign was marked by extreme cruelty, including mass executions, forced labor, the use of poison ordeals, and progressive amputation. She sought to eliminate foreign influence and Christianity, leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of her subjects. Basil II, Byzantine Empire. Basil II, also known as the Bulgar Slayer, was a Byzantine emperor from 976 to 1025. His reign was marked by numerous military campaigns that expanded the Byzantine Empire. He earned his nickname after defeating the Bulgarian army of 15,000 at the Battle of Kladion in 1014, and allegedly blinding 99 out of every 100 captured soldiers, leaving the 100th with one eye to lead the others home. His actions crippled Bulgaria for years. Leopold II, Belgium. Leopold II of Belgium was responsible for the deaths of millions in the Congo Free State, now known as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, during his personal rule from 1885 to 1908. The Congo Free State quickly became a brutal, exploitative regime that relied on forced labor to cultivate and trade rubber, ivory, and minerals. His regime was marked by forced labor, mass murder, mutilations, and other atrocities in the pursuit of rubber and ivory. Chopping off the limbs of enslaved Congolese was a routine form of retribution when Leopold II's quotas were not met. Combined with epidemic diseases from Europeans, Arabs, and African porters, famine, and falling birth rates caused by these disruptions, the atrocities contributed to a sharp decline in the Congolese population, resulting in the deaths of an estimated 10 million Congolese. Leopold sanctioned the creation of child colonies, in which orphaned Congolese would be kidnapped and sent to schools operated by Catholic missionaries, in which they would learn to work or be soldiers. These were the only schools funded by the state. More than 50% of the children sent to the schools died of disease, and thousands more died in the forced marches into the colonies. By 1908, Leopold II's rule was deemed so cruel that European leaders, themselves violently exploiting Africa, condemned it, and the Belgian parliament forced him to relinquish control of his fiefdom. Belgium took over the colony in 1908, and it was not until 1960 that the Republic of the Congo was established after a fight for independence. When Leopold II died in 1909, he was buried to the sound of Belgians booing. Alaric I, Visigoths. Alaric, I was the first king of the Visigoths, best known for his sack of Rome in 410 AD. When he besieged the Romans, he counted on hunger as his main weapon. The hungry Romans finally succumbed to his huge army, consisting of more than 30,000 men, and paid an enormous ransom of 5,000 pounds of gold, much silver, and other goods. His forces looted the city for 3 days, killing and enslaving countless inhabitants. This event marked the beginning of the end for the Western Roman Empire and was remembered for its brutality. Alaric then ordered the theaters, circuses, and gladiator arenas to open, with required performances for the amusement of the conquerors. This went on for 6 full days. At the end of 6 days, Alaric took his army and marched out through the gates, carrying away all the riches. On the way to Sicily, Alaric died. He felt his death was coming and ordered his men to bury him in the bed of the Busento River, placing with his body the richest of the treasures he had taken from Rome. Hernando de Soto, Spanish conquistador. Hernando de Soto was a Spanish explorer and conquistador whose expeditions across the southeastern United States in the 16th century were marked by extreme violence. He was known for enslaving, torturing, and killing Native Americans, often using them as guides and then executing them when they were no longer useful. Hernando de Soto craved gold, glory, and gore in quantities that made even his fellow conquistadors quake. When only 20, he quit the impoverished confines of western Spain to find his fortune in the New World. In the succeeding 16 years, the hawk-nosed young Spaniard enjoyed dizzying success, slaughtering and pillaging indigenous peoples, first in Central America and later in Peru. De Soto returned to Spain, wealthy and celebrated. He won the favor of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, who appointed him governor of Cuba, with the expectation that he would also colonize and plunder La Florida, as the Spanish then called North America. De Soto had no difficulty finding Spanish adventurers to join him. In May 1539, he sailed from Havana for the west coast of what is today Florida, marching across what is now 11 U.S. states, leaving a trail of destruction and disease. On October 9, 1540, the Battle of Maliba occurred between the Spanish conquistador Hernando de Soto and the Native American chief Tuscaloosa in a Mississippian village somewhere in the state of Alabama. After the battle, the Spanish stayed in the area for a month to heal, and lacking supplies and a place to stay, they turned north to look for both, despite De Soto's recent knowledge that there were ships waiting for him at a harbor to the south. Bloodied and disillusioned, De Soto's men grew mutinous. De Soto pushed on, however. He crossed the Mississippi and staggered aimlessly about with his dwindling band until May 1542, when he fell ill from fever and died. Enver Pasha, Ottoman Empire. Enver Pasha was one of the leaders of the Ottoman Empire during World War I and was a key figure in the Armenian genocide. He led a disastrous attack on Russian forces in the Battle of Sarikamish, after which he blamed Armenians for his defeat. He orchestrated the mass deportations, starvation, and systematic killing of Armenians, resulting in the deaths of up to 1.8 million people. Atrocities includes rape, torture, forced conversion to Islam, and a death marches into the Syrian desert. Around 2,500 Armenian churches and monasteries were burned to the ground, and 2,000 schools destroyed. Enver Pasha was one of the principal perpetrators of the late Ottoman genocides, and thus is held responsible for the death of millions of Armenians, 300,000 Assyrians, and 750,000 Greeks. Following defeat in World War I, Enver, along with other leading Unionists, escaped the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman military tribunal convicted him and other Unionists and sentenced them to death in absentia for bringing the empire into World War I and organizing massacres against Greeks and Armenians. Enver ended up in Central Asia, where he was killed leading the Basmachi revolt against the Bolsheviks. In 1996, his remains were reburied in Turkey. Vercingetorix, Gauls. Vercingetorix was a chieftain of the Arverni tribe, whose brutal methods made him a feared leader. He is known for his fierce resistance against Roman conquest during the Gallic Wars. His tactics included burning cities and crops to deny the Romans supplies and slaughtering entire populations who resisted his command. In 52 BC, Vercingetorix united the Gauls in a revolt against Julius Caesar and defeated him at Gergovia, present-day Gergovie, but ultimately was captured and defeated by Caesar at Alesia, present-day Alise-Saint-Reine, in 51 BC and sent to Rome in chains, where he was later executed after being paraded in Caesar's triumph. Gaius Marius, Roman Republic. Gaius Marius was a Roman general and politician known for his reforms of the Roman army, where he recruited landless citizens into the army. These reforms shifted the loyalty of soldiers from the state to their generals, contributing to the rise of powerful military leaders who could challenge the authority of the Senate. His brutal military campaigns against the Cimbri and Teutones involved massacres and mass enslavement. His rivalry with Lucius Cornelius Sulla led to Rome's first civil war. In 87 BCE, Marius seized control of Rome and initiated a series of purges against his political enemies. This period, known as the Marian Massacres, saw the execution of many senators and equestrians who were loyal to Sulla. Francisco Pizarro, Spanish conquistador. Francisco Pizarro led the Spanish conquest of the Inca Empire in the early 16th century, making himself and his men rich and powerful. Pizarro took advantage of his superior weapons and the fact that the Incas were weakened by civil war and the arrival of European diseases to take over the largest empire in the world. His capture and execution of the Incan emperor Atahualpa, followed by the brutal subjugation of the Inca people, was marked by betrayal, mass slaughter, and the looting of vast treasures. Things then fell apart for the invaders when they began to fight amongst themselves for the glittering riches of a crumbling empire. Pizarro was murdered in his home in Lima by a rival Spanish faction in June 1541. Nurhaci, Jurchen. Nurhaci, also known by his temple name as the Emperor Taizu of Qing, was a Jurchen chieftain who united the Jurchen tribes and founded the later Jin dynasty, which eventually became the Qing dynasty of China. He sought revenge for the deaths of his father and grandfather, leading to a series of violent campaigns. His military campaigns against the Ming and Joseon dynasties were marked by extreme brutality, including the massacre of entire towns, forced displacement of populations, and destroying the power bases of his rivals by killing the leaders, their families, and supporters. These figures are remembered not only for their military prowess, but also for the sheer brutality, extreme violence, and ruthless tactics with which they pursued their ambitions of warfare and conquest, often leaving trails of devastation and terror in their wake. Do you agree with this list? Who else will you add and why? Drop your thoughts below. Remember to hit that notification bell to be notified of upcoming videos. Subscribe, like, and share for more on A Cup of History.